Hello, I'm Adam Kielich, the principal attorney at the Kielich Law Firm in Bedford, Texas. Today's video is going to be a little bit different from the other ones that I've posted. Rather than deal with an actual legal issue, I'm going to address a common question that people ask to attorneys, as well as just sort of a general question that's out there, and that's the question of, should I go to law school? It's really a question that everyone grapples with or should grapple with before applying for a law school. I know it's a question that I asked when I was in college to attorneys that I came across, and I know the answer that I always got from attorneys was no, don't do it. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the money. The job isn't as glamorous as you think it is. It's just a ton of work. Now, it is true, being an attorney is a lot of work, and law school is a lot of work, and a lot of people who become attorneys don't feel like their effort was worth the job that they got out of it. But I think the same could generally be said for people in most professions. Like, people who are mid-level managers somewhere don't really look back and think, like, this is really the best job I could be doing. I really love this job, and I would encourage other people to get into mid-level management. I think that could probably be said for any other kind of job. Like, most people just don't do a job that they find fulfilling and think, like, I didn't need to go to college to do this job. Or, maybe that's not true for a trade school. You probably needed to learn at some point how to do that job. But, I think most people just really aren't that impressed with jobs. And I think the big issue as an attorney is whenever you see attorneys on TV or in movies, they live this really glamorous life where, like, they show up to the office at 10 in the morning, kick around for a little while, go to lunch, eat a steak, go back to the office, drink scotch in the office, and then you just kind of walk around from office to office, throwing folders down at different people, making snide comments. You walk out, and then you go drink in the evening, or you sit in the office and drink. And that's kind of the way that attorneys are depicted, and the reality is very different from that. Now, there are some attorneys, I suppose, who do actually practice that way, but for the most part, the work we do is sitting down at our desk or sitting in court and doing work, much in the same way that anyone else sits down at their workspace and works all day. It's really important to understand the disconnect between the way that attorneys are depicted in the media, and especially within Hollywood, and the way that the job actually works. Because if your idea thinking about whether you should go to law school is that you're going to go out and make this huge salary, and your life is going to be awesome, and you're just going to hang around drinking scotch and, like, coming up with crazy ideas, that's just not how it is. And if you've got that in your mind, then you're really coming into a very expensive and very important decision from the completely wrong frame of mind. So there's a ton of information online. Lots of people have weighed in on this question about whether you should go to law school. So I don't really want to get mired in dumping in the same kind of information that everyone else has discussed. But I will sort of tackle that common advice that's out there and then sort of explore different avenues so that rather than just repeating the same stuff that's out there on the internet, maybe I'm throwing in a different way of looking at this question and give you something useful to think about. The reality, the best way to answer this question really of whether you should go to law school is dependent upon your individual situation, both financially as well as your desire to do the work that comes along with being an attorney. And that's really specific to your situation, and much like legal questions, it should be addressed within your own specific circumstances. But if you look online, the vast majority of the information out there hammers out pretty much one simple rule and says, if you don't fit this rule, don't go to law school. And so this is particularly true if you go on to any of the law school forums or like law school prep forums. And what that common or basic rule that everyone seems to agree with is this: you go to law school if one of two things will be true. One, you can go to a top law school, and by top law school I really mean one of the top 14 schools, and from there you can work your way into a big firm where you'll start out at $160,000 or $180,000 a year, and you'll work there, try to become a partner, or you'll bounce out and go in-house as in-house counsel somewhere, or you'll go to a smaller firm where you'll come in as, somebody who's played in the big leagues before. Or two, you go to the best school you can and kind of perform okay, but don't really worry too much about your performance because you have a family connection that can get you a job in one of those big firms. So if mom or dad is an attorney at, specifically a partner at a big law firm, then, you could probably get a job, if not at that firm, then some other firm. Or if you've got a parent or some other close relative that's an executive at a big company that's a client to one of these big firms, they may have some pull to be able to get you that job. If that's the case, you'll be able to get into that big firm job. If one of those two doesn't apply, you don't go to law school. And so you can see the big driving factor within that rule is your ability to get into the big firm. And you want to get into those big firms because they're the most prestigious, they pay the most, and so it's really playing at the highest level of law. So the attitude says. We could really drill this down to just saying that you should only go to law school if you can make a ton of money up front, and that amount of money can repay your law school debt, plus give you that, high-end lifestyle where you're making a ton of money, you're spending a ton of money, and you've got the cash to burn. Now, of course, if you go into those big firms, you're going to work a ton of hours, your life belongs to those firms, and they know it, and that's why they're paying you that big salary. Now, that's fine, of course, if that's your attitude, but if you're not looking to get into that big firm, maybe you've got other ideas about how you would be employed, maybe you're willing to accept being paid less, you go online, you're still going to be told, don't waste your time. You'll notice, of course, that there are more than 14 law schools in the country. Not all of those schools are full of people who are connected to attorneys at big firms or to people who are executives at Fortune 500 companies. So the other people going to law school are vying for getting into the top of the class, getting on to law review, and trying to get whatever big firm positions they can out of what will be hired out of those lower ranked schools. And then, of course, everyone else in the school is vying for whatever other jobs they can get. And the truth is, most people who go to law school would rather have that $180,000 salary rather than an $80,000 salary. So you'll find that chasing the money attitude is pretty common at law school. If your primary or sole goal in going to law school is to snare that big salary, then this common rule really, that's more or less your truth. If you don't have that family connection, you've got to get into a highly ranked school. And it's not just people at the top 14 schools that will get big firm positions, but the lower in the ratings you go, the fewer and fewer spots big firms will hire out of those schools. So if you're maybe in the top 50, you've probably got it, but you're not in the top 14, you probably have to be on law review towards the top of your class. You get further down in the rankings, maybe you've got to be on law review in the top 5 or 10% of the class. By the time you hit that second tier, you pretty much have to be law review plus like the top 5% of your class. Below that, your chances of getting into a big firm position are almost non-existent unless you happen to have that family connection. That doesn't mean it never happens. I'll be honest, I went to a fairly low-ranked local law school, and I did know some people who got into big firm positions who did not have family connections, but they are really the exception to the rule. They had other qualifications that the big firms were looking for that drew them in. That is the reason why they were the exception to that rule. Now, personally, I'm not a believer that this common rule that shows up online is the only reason why you should go to law school, and that if you don't meet it, you definitely should not go to law school. But you do have to realize that if you're not hitting this big firm salary, that you are going to have to come up with a way to pay off your law school debt. And if you're paying $100,000 or $150,000 plus whatever debt you accrued from your undergrad or master's program, if you had some, that's a lot of money to have to figure out how to pay back plus interest, and so that can be a problem. You've got to realize that the lower your class rank and the lower the ranking of your school, the harder it's going to be to find a job making any kind of pay. And of course, whatever jobs you do find are likely to pay increasingly less, along with the rankings of both your school and your class rank. So you've really got to think about how your earning potential, how the debt you're taking on with law school factors together with the school you can get into, and what kind of job prospects might be out there based upon that school. To give you a general idea, the median salary, starting salary for attorneys, tends to be right around $70,000. Now that's a median, which means half of the attorneys are above and half are below. Keep in mind that the half above largely consist of big firm hirings, and below that median, you're going to find lots and lots of jobs. And these are people primarily working contract positions where they're going in and working maybe 50 or 60 hours doing document review, poring over discovery, very tedious work, not particularly great pay. Some of those jobs are only paying $20,000 or $30,000 a year, and that's as an attorney who has passed the bar. If you have $150,000 in debt from law school, and that's accruing at 6 or 8% interest, at $20,000 or $30,000, you're going to be in a real struggle just trying to live in a major metropolitan area anywhere close to the downtown area, let alone paying off those debts. So you've got to think about what kind of income might be available. Is it going to be worth it to take on the risk of not making those big salaries, that just because you come out of law school, you may not have even that $70,000 job. You might be making $30,000, $40,000 starting out. And also keep in mind as well that finding a job as an attorney is no easy task. Unless you get a committed job from one of these big firms, and not all of their hires are committed right out of law school, you may be in the hunt for a job for a while. The common way that job statistics are recorded and reported for law school graduates is whether or not you have a job 9 months after graduation. So if you graduate in May, the idea is we shouldn't really even be concerned whether you have a job until the following spring. That's a long time to go without a job when you've got that law school debt hanging out, accruing interest the whole time. So let's say you're prepared to make that financial analysis and say, maybe the finance works in favor of going to law school. If I'm not getting that big firm salary, what are some other reasons why I might want to go to law school? Well, number one, you may have a reasonable belief that you can grow into success And that might be an alluring reason. If money is driving your purpose in going to law school, even though you know you're not going to make a ton of money up front, that's fine. You may be driven. You may be the kind of person who will go into law school. You know the law school you can get into based upon maybe your undergraduate grades isn't terribly highly ranked, but you're going to work harder than anyone else. You're going to sit down and really try to innovate and capture the best job you can and make the best out of it. And maybe you're not making, $200,000 right out of law school, but you think you can work your way into that kind of salary down the road. And you can't just hope or expect that it's going to happen. You really need to have a reasonable belief and a plan for how that happens, and that plan needs to make sense. Like, just because you get a job as an attorney making $50,000 out of law school doesn't mean you're going to make $200,000 5 years later. That rarely ever happens. Number 2, you're not afraid to work a lot and to not really care how tedious that work is. Generally, attorneys work a lot. It's hard work. It's stressful work. The schedule is not always locked in. You're often not working an 8-to-5 schedule. A lot of times, if you're preparing for trials or hearings, you may be up all night the night before preparing, trying to squeeze in that last-minute preparation, make sure there's nothing you've overlooked. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of stress to come in with. So you've got to be prepared to do a lot of work, a lot more work than other people, quite frankly, who are making $70,000 salaries are working. Number 3, you like to do research, you like writing, you like public speaking, or some combination of those skills, and you really want to do a job where those skills are implemented. There are very few non-science or engineering jobs where you're going to do research and writing as a primary function of your job. I guess in academics that's true too, but getting jobs in academia is by itself a real struggle, and there's sort of a unique path that goes along with that too. But by and large, if you cut out science, engineering, or academia, there's not a lot of jobs where you're going to spend much time doing research and writing as your job. And of course, with public speaking, lots of jobs might have some facet of public speaking every once in a while, but there are really very few non-sales or non-teaching jobs where public speaking is a core aspect of the job that you do. And number 4, maybe you have some philosophical or ethical or political reason why being an attorney is an important job for you. Maybe you want to go be an advocate for an environmental cause or a political cause, or you really feel committed to the idea of trying to help people in your community. That might be a good reason for you to become an attorney and to try to pursue that path. Know, of course, that you get into that balance between trying to make money to live versus being the kind of attorney that you want to be. And not all attorneys end up practicing in areas of law that they want to or that they thought they would in law school. You may go into law school thinking you're going to be a badass criminal attorney, and then the job you find is writing wills at some local estate planning firm. That might be how you pay the bills, and that happens quite a bit, quite frankly. So those are some reasons why you might want to go to law school. Let's talk about some of the reasons why you would not want to go to law school or should not go to law school. And the first one, by and large, is that being an attorney or even going to law school is not like TV. That show, How I Met Your Mother, one of the characters spends the first few years in law school, and this guy is never working. He's always drinking or hanging out. That is not how it is. I mean, maybe if you're at the bottom of the class in law school, you spend a lot of time drinking and not really working. But if you have any aspiration that you're going to try to be competitive in the job market after law school, it's not like that. You're going to spend a ton of time researching, preparing for class, being in class, trying to find internships or externships, trying to find ways to distinguish yourself from your other classmates. Being an attorney is not like basically any TV show or movie that's ever been made about being an attorney. Like, you see from time to time the attorney who's down on his or her luck or whatever, and I guess those parts are kind of accurate, but if there were any portion of any TV show that I would say is most like being an attorney, it's probably the first year or two of The Practice, which came on in the late 90s, where they really show how they're scraping by and basically working hand to mouth from case to case, paying the bills and trying to build a practice that has some cushion, that has a reputation that's positive within the legal community there. Of course, if you go to a big firm, they're not scraping by. They already have the big office and the cash and all of that good stuff to it. So that's not quite true. But as far as working in a big firm, I don't think there's any TV show that really shows what it's like there. That they spend enormous hours working, and they're basically on call to that law firm all the time. I talked about how I Met Your Mother is so unrealistic about law school. The one aspect where that show really is kind of accurate is how much Marshall, the character who goes to law school, how much Marshall actually struggles to find a job, and that like the years he spends trying to balance doing what he wants in environmental law versus working in jobs where he's trying to make rent and pay his bills and buy an apartment for him and his wife. But by and large, like if you watch any of the other shows like Boston Legal or Suits, Ally McBeal, some of the other popular shows that have been on over the past few decades, these shows are totally unrealistic. And Suits is probably by far the most unrealistic because all the attorneys seem to just spend their time walking around throwing folders on people's desks. It's fun to watch, just not realistic. So number 2, another reason why you may not want to go to law school, if you're not able to get that big salary from the big firm job and you really want that money, if you're chasing cash and that's your core reason to go to law school, if you don't hit that internet rule dead on, find a different way to make a bunch of cash. There are other ways. If you feel like you could go out there and be a world-class litigator and go up in court and be an advocate, then go find another job doing public speaking. There are tons of sales jobs where people, advocate for their client and make a ton of cash doing it. Like high-end sales people net $100,000 plus per year, and they don't have to waste 3 years in law school or accrue any kind of debt other than college or maybe an MBA. So there are definitely other ways for you to go get that cash. Number 3, the competition in law school and the competition in the job market might be enough to drive you away from going to law school. I've already touched on some of the challenges with the job market that, when you graduate, you may spend months, even after you find out you passed the bar, looking for a job. You may have to take a job where you've got to move somewhere you don't want to move. You may practice in an area you don't want to practice. You may be doing a job that's, for some other reason unsavory to you. And the reality is, like I said, I talked about some of those document review jobs. You may find other jobs that you don't like where you're, reviewing very boring contracts or wills. Sorry to people who find that stuff interesting. I just don't. You might find yourself at a criminal law or a criminal defense firm where you're the night shift, where you come in at midnight and work overnight, and you wait for calls from clients from jail or from bail bondsmen, and you've got to go drive down to the courthouse and sit in for a hearing or bail somebody out or whatever. It's not glamorous work. And, that might be the only job that you can find. There are lots of people who graduate, pass the bar, find no jobs working as an attorney, and end up having to go do something else anyway. If that's going to be you, look, just cut out the heartache of law school and go find that other job up front. And if you're not somebody who's prepared to put in unlimited amounts of work to law school to try to get to the top of your class and give yourself the best possible chances to find a good job, then you probably don't want to go to law school and put yourself at risk with your time and your money to end up going into a job that has nothing to do with law school or passing the bar. The competition in law school by itself is something that's new for most people. Most people who get into law school have been at the top of their class or amongst the top of the class their whole lives. Like, you went to kindergarten, you were the smart kid in kindergarten. And all through elementary school, you were the smart kid in class. You were probably the smart kid in the whole grade. And then you went into middle school or junior high, and you met a small number of other people who had been like you at their own elementary school. You all kind of competed. You were amongst the top. You went to high school, same thing. You went to college, same thing. You're still at the top. Law school is a distillation of all of those colleges, bringing in the top people who have always performed well and are used to always performing well. So you've got a ton of people who are good students, who are effective test takers for the most part, all coming together. And what's really new about this environment is, in law school, not everybody gets an A. It's not a situation where the professor can say, everybody scored well, everyone gets 100 on the test. You are ranked against a bell curve, which necessarily means some people are going to be at the bottom. Now, schools differ as far as whether they'll fail people out over a grade. My experience, I never had bad grades in law school, but my experience from talking to professors is that you really have to try to fail a class in law school, but if you don't try, you're pretty much guaranteed to get a C in that class. And grades are very important because they filter into your class rank, which in turn filters into the job opportunities that you'll have, both while you're in school for internships and after you graduate. A lot of law firms will request only to interview people who are in the top, a certain percentage, whether it's the top 50 or 25 or 15 or 10 or 5 or whatever. They'll make those cuts, and they're hard cuts. It doesn't matter that it's an employment law firm and you got A pluses in every employment class, but you're still in the middle of the class rank. If they only want to see the top 25%, you're out of luck. You've got to find some creative way to get yourself an interview there. So that can be very startling to people who are used to getting A's all the time, to suddenly find themselves in a situation where they're getting B's or maybe even C's. You've got to be prepared to work harder than you have at any other point as a student. If not, maybe you don't go to law school. So number 4, you've got to think about the cost of law school and whether you want to bear the burden of that cost. Law school is not cheap. Even public schools are often fairly expensive, and depending upon your grades and the rank of the school, you may get some sort of scholarship which can help with the burden of that cost. But unless the law school is giving you free everything, you're still going to bear some sort of cost, and you've either got to pay that out of pocket or pay it out by taking on debt. So really think about, is it worth your time to accrue that debt and then have to pay it off down the road, or to pay out of pocket for the cost of school, and make sure that whatever kind of kind of job opportunities are going to be available to you will make those costs worth it. And for the most part, schools don't give full rides unless you could get into a highly ranked school and you're opting to go to a much lower ranked school that knows that you've been admitted somewhere else and they're just trying to get you in by offering you free tuition. Lots of schools do offer partial scholarships, and if you're offered a partial scholarship, that can certainly help defray the cost of law school, but you've also got to balance the rank of the school against what kind of job opportunities that's going to create for you. It may be worth it for you to pay a little more to go to a higher ranked school versus saving some money and going to a lower ranked school. And sort of dovetailed into that, the other reason is just looking at the debt you're going to take on. Even if you're getting a partial scholarship, if you're taking on student loans to help finance the rest of your law school, keep in mind that not only does that debt have to be paid back, but it's accruing at 6 or 8%, which is a pretty big interest rate. I mean, as far as credit goes, that's not saying much about you as a credit risk. If you were to go out and get a business loan to start a business, you most likely would get an interest rate lower than 6 or 8%, and to have to pay back 6 or 8%, that's going to make the amount of your debt grow quite rapidly, especially if you're deferring payment the first few years or paying on a graduated payment schedule where you're barely paying anything the early years. So you've really got to think about the cost, not only of the school itself, but the cost of the debt that you'll have to pay down the road. I think this is number 6. Think about the fact that you're going to lose 3 years of earning opportunities while you're in law school. Sure, you might go work part-time at a firm, and they'll pay you while you're going to school or whatever, but you're giving up 3 years where you could make a full-time salary coming out of college, or if you're looking at a second career, to have stayed where you were for 3 years. That's a lot of money that you're giving up. And if you think coming out of undergrad that you can make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over 3 years, you're basically losing in income what you're paying for law school. So you're getting hit twice, if you think about it, in the cost of going to law school. Not to mention that you're going to start 3 years later into an industry at the bottom, whereas if you went into another job right after college, you would be 3 years into that career and have built into a larger salary position. So that's something that I think is almost always overlooked in thinking about law school, that you could go out and find a job in so many other industries where you can make a competitive salary coming out of college, and you're really losing out on that earning opportunity. And like I said, it's not just the 3 years you spend in law school, but the fact that you're starting 3 years later on building into a career and what your salary potential could have been as you go. So you've got to hope that you're able to find a job as an attorney that is a comparable or better salary, and that you can increase your salary faster as an attorney than you would working in some other industry that would not require you to go to a full-time school for another 3 years, and make sure that you're really getting a better financial deal out of going to law school and becoming an attorney versus working in any other field. And the last reason that I'll spot is thinking about the work-life balance. For many attorneys, you're going to dedicate a ton of time to your work, and you may have to be on call all the time or a considerable amount of time. This is especially true if you work at a big firm. You're going to be expected to work all kinds of hours. You're going to be expected to cancel vacations, to not take medical leave, to answer phone calls at 3 a.m. to come in and do work were to come in at 4 in the morning and start working that day. And of course, big firms are not the only ones who ask for a lot of work. If you go into a smaller firm, it's just as likely that you're going to work lots of hours. If you're a litigator, you're likely going to be preparing late nights or extremely early mornings ahead of hearings or trials. That's going to eat into your time. You might be working weekends. You may have to work at night trying to generate business for the firm so that you can justify your position being there. There are lots of other jobs you could go work in where you'll go work 8 to 5, and when you go home at night, your job is done until the next morning. So now let's piece all this stuff together and sort of give you a framework to think about that's far clearer and more narrow than all of the other stuff that I've discussed before in what is turning out to be a far longer video than I had expected. So let's give you this framework to think about. Think about the financial aspect of going to law school. And even if you're thinking, I'm not in this for the money, I'm not trying to snag one of those big firm positions, that's okay. You've still got to think about the financial aspect because you're still having to pay out of pocket for school or take on debt to pay it off. And at some point, that law school has to be paid for. So think about these three issues with the finances of going to law school. Number one, the time value of going to school and the job search that you'll conduct after hopefully passing the bar. Number two, the lost employment opportunities that you could have somewhere else. And number three, the hard cost of the school and whatever the debt and the interest that comes along with it that you might use to pay for school. If you put all of those together and think about what is this going to cost, you should really be thinking about this through the lens of making a $150,000 investment in starting a business. And in many ways, it's very similar to that. You're going to have a cash outlay. You may have to take on debt to get it done. You're not going to start out making a ton of money up front. You may start out making no money until you build that business. And if you think about it from that framework, that you are really building a business rather than just going to school to start a career, you see that the risks involved in making a $150,000 commitment is far greater than just another 3 years of school. And you should research going to law school, what law schools you can get into, and what amount of money you should pay for that law school long before you start submitting applications or take the LSAT. You should really think about it and put in the kind of research that you would if you were going to start out a business in an industry that you likely know little to nothing about. By and large, people get into law school unless they're going to like a top 14 school with no real idea about what's going to happen in law school, what that job market is going to be like, how to get particular kinds of jobs as an attorney, what those career paths are. Very little thought is given to the cost of law school, how it's going to be paid back, what it's going to be like to have a $150,000 debt accruing at 6 or 8% interest and how that gets paid back. And the thing to keep in mind that you may not be aware of is that if you actually took out $150,000 to start a business and that business goes belly up, you can declare bankruptcy and walk away from most of that debt. With student loans, you can't do that. You're locked into those debts. And should you declare bankruptcy and try to avoid those, you may put your law license at risk and have to choose between paying the debt or continuing to be an attorney. And that's tough. That's a unique problem that most people don't face when they take on business debts. So really think through a lot about this decision. It's not like when you went to college, you just tried to get into most likely the best college you could and that you could afford. And, at 18, you probably didn't think very much about how that debt's going to be paid back because You're so excited to go away from your parents and go into college and have this new experience. Law school is different. It's a very different experience. It's not the kind of fun. You're not going to spend time lounging around, you'll probably drink a lot of cheap beer. That part will probably stay the same, but for the rest, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be a lot of work, and what comes out of it is going to be a real challenge getting into the job market. I think as well, along that aspect of the finance, what kind of work level you're going to be prepared to, or you will have to prepare to endure at each income level that might be available to you. You may not want to put in the work that comes along with a $100,000 attorney job, but at the same time, you may not be able to live and pay your debt at $50,000 working at a firm where maybe you work 8 to 5 and go home and your job doesn't really follow you. And of course, beyond the finance, you should also consider, could you be happier somewhere else doing something else? Could you follow through on a different master's program and get into a job that you would enjoy better, or where the job prospects are better, or where it's easier to reach an income level that you desire? Could you find a job with a work-life balance that makes you happier, that would be more in tune with the way that you want your life to be? If you want to raise a family at some point, would a different industry or a different career make that more likely or more enjoyable for you? Those are things that you should consider long before you start down the path of accruing the cost of going to law school. And that's really, in my mind, the way you should shape that decision. And if it seems like there's a whole lot left that's not addressed by it, it's really because it becomes your job to go out and research and make those financial decisions, weigh the risks, weigh the non-financial issue about your work-life balance, about whether it's worth it to walk around telling people that you're an attorney and you're going to, destroy them in court, versus working 70 hours a week. Some people may feel like one is more important than the other. You've got to decide that for yourself. The last thing that I'll share with you is really to kind of circle back on talking about the stereotypes about life as an attorney. And the most dangerous place that builds a terrible and dangerous stereotype for you is not the TV or the movies, it's the law schools themselves. The admissions and career services departments of the law schools are both first and foremost marketing agencies for the law schools. It's their job to convince you that you can get into this law school, and that if you pay the tuition and graduate, you will make a bunch of money as an attorney, and it will be totally awesome. For a long time, many law schools have manipulated their career data to be able to make arguments that seem on their face true, that you will get a job and make a ton of money doing it. After years of pressure from largely from students and law school graduates, law schools have started to become more honest about this information. So thankfully, in doing your research, you can find some more honest information. Their goal is to convince you you can make a ton of money, and that's why financially this is worth it for you. But they're really telling you that giving them a bunch of money is financially in their best interest. And it's not hard to imagine that that's the case. Now, you would expect that the law schools would have to be honest and not deceptive like this. But the sad reality is the law schools have a lot of flexibility in how they manipulate this data. And as an attorney, you have to appreciate at some level the fact that these law schools are very good at presenting a case that advocates in their best interest very effectively. I remember when I was considering law schools, and I went to a law day or whatever they called it for the law school I ended up going to, the head of career services got up and talked about the job market, and all he really focused on was this one student from a year or two ago who got a job making like $225,000 coming out of law school. Now, of course, if you were sitting there thinking, I'm going to pay, I think at the time it was $130,000 to go through 3 years of law school, if you can make almost twice that your starting year, you're golden. Why would you not do that? But that was one student, and if I had to guess, that student probably went to work for somebody who was connected to his parents. There was no talk about the reality that their own career data showed that half of the students coming out of the school did not go into jobs working in the law, that their own data showed that starting salaries were well below the median, or maybe at best at the median for law school lawyer starting jobs. This data is radically different from the presentation that he made about this six-figure salary. I know very few people who graduated and went on to get those jobs, and those were all the people who went into big firms. And like I said, those people were the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of people that I knew from law school struggled to find jobs, and if they found jobs, it was rarely the job that they thought they were going to get, or the kind of job in any way that they thought they were going to get that first day of law school. So when you're doing your research, when you're looking at information about the schools, keep in mind that the admissions and career services data is presented in a way that advocates for the law school and not for you. Look for the raw data that's out there, if you can find it for the law school, that shows what the employment statistic is 9 months after graduation and what the reported salaries are. And know that this data itself is still largely manipulated or massaged by the law schools to make it look as good as they can possibly make it. And keep in mind as well that oftentimes, because this data is self-reported, people who have not found jobs working as attorneys do not want to brag to it to the law school and admit failure. So the degree to which that data may be unreliable through no action of the law school itself, we don't really know. But you should take anything that the law school is sending you as marketing materials that should be taken with a grain of salt. The more objective information you can find, the more likely you are to be able to make a wise decision and to make an objective decision yourself. So I hope this very long video was of any use to you, and if it was probably in this last 15 minutes. But whatever you do, I would strongly encourage you not to go into this decision lightly, to really think about what you're doing and how it's going to have an impact on the rest of your life. And you may be dragging this law school debt with you until you're in your 40s or 50s. That's something to think about. And if you make that decision lightly, go into law school and just treat it like every other educational experience you've had where you've kind of blown through it and made A's, you're going to find yourself in a very difficult position once you've already started paying money to get into law school. So make that analysis. Be honest about your desire to do the work, your desire to bear the financial cost, and to bear the risk that you'll get the success that you may find in going to law school. At any rate, like I said, I hope this has been helpful. I think I've rambled on long enough in this, so I'll cut it off here. Whatever you decide to do, I wish you good luck, and I guess that's it. Good luck, make good decisions, and be happy with the choices you make.